Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us today. It's been quite a long time. It's been a hot minute. And there's some reasons for that. About 7 months ago, I launched the Stink Sink, and all my kind of extra reefing bandwidth to make videos has kind of been taken up with that. And also, about 7 months ago, things were not going well with the tank. I'd really been battling cyano for quite a bit. It was very, very frustrating. Never had as big of a cyano problem on a tank before. Lost one of the garden eels when I was treating for cyano. And so really took that opportunity to take a step back and let the tank do its thing. Just kind of be as hands-off as I could and let the tank kind of try to stabilize. Things are much better now. Still got a patch or two of cyano. But about a month ago, corresponding to getting my calcium reactor built and online, finally decided to add some SPS frags. So we put in about 20 frags, some from local reefer, thanks James, and then some from Battle Corals. And they're looking pretty good right now. I mean, they're tiny frags. It's gonna be a while until they grow out, but I think the tank is kind of on the upswing. Corals are doing well, the zoa wall is filling out, I'm actually starting to do some thinning. The fish are doing fantastic. It was kind of interesting to look back and see how big the fish have gotten in the last year, which is about how long they've been in the tank. So here's a little shot of when I first added the tangs, and you can see especially the sailfin tang skipper, he's about tripled in size, which is pretty remarkable. One of the things to battle cyano is, of course, to increase flow. So one of the things I did was to add a couple power heads to the back of the tank to help with the area right at the base back of the tank, which on a peninsula tank is where a lot of the detritus collects and I get the biggest patches of cyano. So I made these little brackets to allow me to mount these little Ciche power heads, which are about, I think, 1,500 gallons per hour, pointing straight down, and that has helped clear out kind of the cyano patches in the back of the tank. So these mount and kind of blend into the back of the tank actually pretty well, just up in the corner here. You notice the bleached white rock here, and that's because as I thin out and make adjustments to the zoa wall, I'm taking the rock off and soaking it in vinegar to address the vermitids, which is one of the consequences of kind of being hands-off in the tank for the last 6 months, is that we do have a pretty good vermitid population now. It's not that big of a deal, they're manageable. If you're going to get a pest, they're one of the more innocuous ones to get, but still a bit of a pain. Fishroom is about the same. I did end up adding in this auxiliary tank on this shelf, which was always the plan. I had a video card die, so lost a little bit of footage there, but that's really just been to help with fragging zoas and kind of a coral hospital tank as I rebalance the zoa wall. So this tank is, I think it's an Aquamax 22 long. It's 11 by 11 by 36, and the lighting is just a Kessel A80 nano light with 2 T5s, and that gives me about 200 par, which is plenty for this tank. It's fed by a Ciche 3.5 just from this top sump, and that goes up and over into a VCA nozzle, and then drains back into the top sump as well. So if there's any power outages, it can just keep on circulating without me having to worry about water level. If you haven't checked out the Stink Sink, here's the little plug. It's been doing pretty well, and right now for the holidays we got 10% off and the free ozone hardware upgrade. So check it out, reefeco.com. That's my little pitch. And here are the zoa plugs after I take them off the wall and frag off the zoas, soak them in vinegar to get the vermitids off, and they're ready to go back on the wall, probably with some new zoas. And here are the frag tanks still on the opposite wall, and these are still not hooked up and probably won't be hooked up for another year until I have enough coral to get into them. Here's the calcium reactor in the corner, the second chamber on the bottom, and the main unit on this shelf. And let's go ahead and see how we built this. So here I am doing some edge prep on the calcium reactor pieces. If you want to learn a little bit more about building with acrylic, you can watch this video in the upper right on building the sumps for the Fishroom. But in designing this calcium reactor, I knew it had to be pretty big because the system's going to be 900 gallons with a lot of frags, and wanted to use the relatively small fish room space as efficiently as possible. So most calcium reactors you see are built in a cylinder, and I think that's mainly to save the manufacturers the trouble of having to glue the seams. But you can get a lot more volume. This reactor is going to be 12 by 24 out of a cylinder. If you build it in a rectangle, you get about a 27% increase in volume. So we're going to build this in a rectangle with both an upflow and a downflow design. So the water will enter and flow up one side and then back down the other, and that's again to make it kind of the most efficient use of space. You've seen me do this before. We're using the pin method to glue everything together. So the secondary chamber or degassing chamber will help, I hope, to raise the pH a bit. And I know there have been some studies from BRS that they don't do a whole lot, and I think that's just because they're never big enough. So the largest degassing chamber at Geo's Reef, which I'm kind of using as a guidepost for a lot of this stuff, is 6 by 18. This will be 6 by 24 by 24, and the water will just flow in this pattern to essentially make this equal to a 6-inch diameter chamber 10 feet tall. So hopefully that will increase the volume and help with boosting the pH of the effluent as it leaves the reactor. And here's just some fun footage of my CNC cutting out the parts for the calcium reactor. So the top flange for the secondary chamber and the calcium reactor itself was basically a lamination of some 1/4-inch acrylic. I didn't have thicker 1/2 inch that I would like to have used, so made it a little bit stronger and a little bit thicker by laminating 2 pieces together. And then, of course, had to thread a million holes for the flange for the screws to seal it. So that was a fun time. So I've decided to add a calcium reactor at this point just because my calcium and alkalinity 2-part additive is reaching about 500 milliliters a day, which is kind of crazy because there's so few hard corals in the tank, but that's almost entirely from the coralline algae. It's all over the tank on rocks, obviously, but also entirely coating the sand, which is a little bit more chunky sand. So it's also growing on the sand. So it's kind of crazy that I have to add a calcium reactor at this point without even really any SPS corals. And here's the beginning of kind of the plumbing mayhem after assembling the basic bodies of the main reactor and the secondary chamber. Now you've got to plumb it all. Here's the finished product after being plumbed. And this is a CJ 4.0 pump that I painted white, which I did because I'm crazy. And you'll see that it draws in water from the bottom of one side and pumps it into the bottom of the other, so the water flows up one side and then down the other. And here's the secondary chamber with a can of beer for scale. And I'm really hoping the size of this chamber will help boost the effluent pH. And this corner of the fish room was always slated for the calcium reactor. So I had to build a shelf just to use the space a little bit more efficiently. Had to be a pretty strong shelf. And I dressed up my CO2 cylinder with a little neoprene sleeve. And I'm using the carbon doser regulator, which is an electronic solenoid, which is really the one to get. So I filled the calcium reactor with a little bit of media, and this is what I use for the second chamber, which is really just crushed coral, a little bit chunkier crushed coral than regular carob sea crushed coral. So here's this beast. There's a backup CO2 cylinder in the back, so when I do run out of CO2, I can just switch it over while I'm waiting for the other one to get refilled. A standard bubble counter and check valve on the left where the CO2 comes in. On the top of the lid, there's a pH probe. The effluent goes out the far right, down back into the second chamber below. And then the valves on the top allow me, I can bleed off excess CO2 or top things off if I need to when I was filling it. And then there's a little inset in the lid where actually the CO2 accumulates, and that gets sucked in and recirculated through this line down into the recirculation pump. And the water is sucked in on the left and then pumped in on the right. And so the water flows up one side on the right and then down on the left. And here's the second chamber, and everything is fed by a single Versa. I was originally going to have the secondary chamber be pressurized. There's some drain valves on the bottom there, but found that the CO2 was accumulating in the first chamber, so ended up venting each one of these chambers. So the water it still flows through in the predictable kind of linear fashion as designed, going through all the media, but then it just drains via gravity from this red line I had to drill into the side there rather than coming out the top. And then it just flows into the sump. I'm running it at about 6.8, which is a little bit higher than some people do. And that was kind of by design. Hopefully everything is big enough that I can run it at a little bit higher pH to not depress pH quite as much. It's fed not with a pump, but just via suction. So that line starts in the sump, and the circulation pump on the reactor itself creates suction, which feeds in the water that you need. And I'll probably increase the effluent line to 3/8 eventually, just to make sure that nothing gets clogged. So I'm pretty pleased with the way this turned out. You know, you build something and you hope it works the way you designed it to, and I think this is going to serve me pretty well. It's the winter here, and I can't open the windows, so it went from about 8.3 to 8.1 pH on the tank, and hopefully that'll improve. I'm still dosing caulk and some sodium hydroxide to get the pH up, but we'll eventually run a skimmer line outside too. So in closing, here's some footage of the fish I've got in quarantine, which is a Millinaris wrasse, a 6-line wrasse, and then a really pretty female swallowtail angel, which is one of the few completely reef-safe angelfish. So, you know, after not adding anything to the tank for about 9 months and letting things try to stabilize, it's really nice to start to add some new corals and some new fish and kind of get this tank back to where I'd like it to be. So. Thanks again for watching a little bit longer video today, and hope you all have wonderful holidays and happy reefing.